And in this first sermon, he says, this is halfway down the page, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering is this: it is the complete cessation of that very thirst, giving it up, renouncing it, emancipating oneself from it, detaching oneself from it. So if the cause of dukkha is tanha, if you remove the tanha, you've removed the cause. And you're left with the state that we call enlightenment. In the Sanskrit language, it is called Nirvana, and in the Pali, it is Nibbāna. I'm sure some of you have heard of this word. It was already known before the time of the Buddha as a description of a state of great happiness, but it wasn't defined as the Buddha defined it. The problem is, in fact, how do you define Nibbāna? It's a state which is beyond our own experience. In fact, it's, until you attain it, it's beyond anyone's experience. And it's very difficult to describe this to someone who's never experienced it. Imagine you have never tasted sugar, and I want to give you an explanation. What does sugar taste like? I could talk to you for a year, and you still would have no idea what sugar tastes like. Once you get it on your tongue, and you experience it for yourself, now you know what sugar tastes like. But no amount of description is going to lead you there. And so, similarly, this state of Nibbāna is not easy to define because it is beyond our day-to-day experience. Perhaps you know the story of the king and the blind men. A king has some blind men brought into the presence of an elephant. And he says to them, I want each of you to tell me, what is this? One man puts out his hand, he touches the leg and says, oh, this is a pillar. Another one touches the ear and says, this is a fan. Another one touches the tusk and says, this is a plough. Another one touches the tail, which has a lot of hairs growing in the tip. This is a broom. Then the arguments start. Each man argues that he is right. He says, I know it, I know I am right because I have grasped it. And I think this is an analogy for a lot of religious disagreement. We may think we and we alone have grasped the truth, and other teachings are therefore wrong. But it may be we have in fact grasped only a part of the truth, and other teachings have also grasped a part of the truth. No one has got hold of the whole of the truth. When the Buddha taught, he said, he didn't say he taught Buddhism. He just said he taught the truth. Truth cannot be sectarian. Either something's true or it's not true. If it's true for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you call yourself a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Christian or anything else. Either something is true or it's not true. And the Buddha said what he taught was the truth.
Is that what Dhamma
that's a good question. Dhamma is one of these words which has several different meanings. It can indeed refer to the truth. It can refer to the Buddha's teachings, because he didn't differentiate between the truth and his teachings. It can also refer to the building blocks of existence, which is a very different meaning. But generally, yes, you can say that Dhamma, or in Sanskrit, Dharma, is the Buddha's teachings. So it is easier to say what Nibbāna is not. It's easier to ascribe the negatives to it. You can say it is the end of certain things. It is the end of suffering, the cessation of suffering, the end of three root defilements that we all have in our minds. They are lobha, dosa, and moha. All other negative states of mind are a mixture of these three. They are the three primary roots. You can think of them perhaps a little bit like primary colours. You mix the primary colours together and you can get any other colour. You mix these roots together, you get any other defilement in the mind. Lobha is attachment. It's like tanha. Greed, wanting, desire. Dosa is the opposite. Want to get rid of, meaning hatred, dislike, anger. Moha is ignorance, non-understanding, the lack of wisdom. You can have moha just by itself, pure ignorance. But lobha must also have moha. If there was no ignorance, there would be no lobha. Similarly, if there was no ignorance, there would be no dosa. Dosa and lobha are mutually exclusive. One is attraction, the other is aversion. So you can't have them at the same time. You have one or the other. But they both have to be accompanied by ignorance or non-understanding. So the state of Nibbāna is the eradication of lobha and dosa and moha. Eradication is permanent. There's no backsliding. They cannot come back. Once you've got rid of them, that is finish. We can also say that Nibbāna is the eradication of the asava, the special knowledge that the Buddha attained at the end of the third watch of the night when he reached enlightenment, and which marked his attainment of enlightenment, was the knowledge of the eradication of the asava. We can call them corruptions or defilements. There are four of them. There's the defilement of sense desire, which is already covered. There's the corruption of bhava, becoming, which we've also covered. And there's the corruption of wrong view, ditthi, wrong understanding of the way things are. In particular, the ascribing of some quality of permanence to ourself. And then fourthly, the corruption of avidya, which is another word for moha, for ignorance. So we can say that Nibbāna is the eradication of these four asavas. There are also two other terms that we can use. The first is asamkata. That means not conditioned, not compounded. This is actually a very important point. Before I ever got interested in Buddhism, the idea of things arising due to a cause was not really, well, it's something I sort of vaguely knew about, but I didn't give it much thought. But it's very important. Everything within us and around us is a result of a preceding event. Something causes. This piece of paper has not always existed. It had to be formed by a process in a factory, and that factory had to use various materials. Other materials were needed to make the factory. There needed to be people in there to operate the factory. We needed maybe electricity or something, or some form of power. That's got to be made and transferred to the factory. So everything is subject to causation, except the state of Nibbāna. Because it is not subject to causation, it is permanent. The Buddha's last recorded words were, "Impermanent are all conditioned things. Work out your own salvation with diligence." Impermanent are all conditioned things. And the exception here is the state of Nibbāna. Because it's not conditioned, it is permanent. Does that make any sense? Okay. So that's one thing you can say about Nibbāna. It is asamkata, not caused. The other thing you can say is it is anidasanang, without characteristics. As soon as you ascribe a characteristic to something, you are limiting it. If you say something is very big, there is nevertheless a limit to it. If something is very small, there's also a limit to that. But Nibbāna has no limitations. And we cannot ascribe to it characteristics. There was a very highly esteemed monk, Dr. Rahula, whom I mentioned earlier. He wrote the book, What the Buddha Taught. Sadly, he died about 20 years ago. But I remember him talking here one evening, and he said he had been asked to sit on a panel of so-called religious experts from various different religions. He was there as the Buddhist representative. And there was a discussion taking place, and they were taking questions from the audience. And one question came up. What is God? And the chairman steered that question to a Christian priest. So the Christian priest stood up to answer the question. As he was standing up, Dr. Rahula said to him, "Excuse me. Anything you say about God must be wrong." Again, you cannot ascribe qualities to an unlimited characteristic. So we do have a problem to to describe Nibbāna in any way that is really meaningful to us. It's beyond our own experience. We can take it on the word of the Buddha, and we can take it on the word of various followers of his who have attained enlightenment, both at his time and subsequently, that it is a highly, well, the Buddha called it, it is the highest happiness. That means there is also happiness in other areas. The Buddha didn't deny that there is happiness, but Nibbāna is the highest. So we do have happiness in the everyday world, but the happiness of the everyday world is limited. It's impermanent, it's conditional, and cannot be relied upon. We could say that, first of all, Nibbāna is a kind of realization. It is a realization sometimes likened to awakening from a dream. Normally we don't see things correctly. We see things as if we're in a dream. But the state of Nibbāna means that we can understand things properly. Understand what? Understand the Four Noble Truths. To begin with, you can read about the Four Noble Truths, you can discuss the Four Noble Truths, and you get a kind of intellectual understanding. But when you really experience these truths, that is a state of realization. And it leads, of course, to the dropping of all attachment to sense objects, to the sensory world. It doesn't mean to say you can't experience happiness from the sensory world, but you're not attached to it at all. And the Buddha often spoke about the pleasures, the delights of living in the forest. He obviously enjoyed that, but he wasn't attached to it. That's where the grasping comes in, that we are tied up with. It's also a state of liberation. It is the liberation from these qualities of lobha, dosa, and moha. It's liberation from all negative states of mind, liberation from all states of misery and unhappiness and dissatisfaction. It is therefore a state of moral perfection, because the enlightened being can no longer perform any action which is in any way unwholesome or unskillful. You can use the word bad or evil. It can't perform any action which causes suffering to others. So it is the state of pure happiness. And it was attained by the Buddha at the age of 35, after his time spent with these teachers, Alarika Lama and Uddaka Ramaputta, and then he went to spend time with these ascetics. And then he struck off by himself and he reached enlightenment. That was the age of 35. And then he continued to live until the age of 80. So we can say that there are two I don't want to say levels, two aspects perhaps of Nibbāna. There's the aspect of Nibbāna which relates to the attainment in this life. Unlike some religions which teach that you die and then you may go to heaven, in Buddhism, Nibbāna has to be attained while you are alive. So if you want to know for sure whether it exists or not, you can attain it here and now. You don't have to wait until you die to find out whether Nibbāna is true or not. So that is the first stage, or the first realization, that Nibbāna exists, and we can say that is Nibbāna with the five aggregates, the five khandhas which the Buddha used to describe an individual. Those five khandhas are still in existence. So this can be attained while the individual is alive. It's a mental attainment, a mental achievement, so there will be no difference externally. You can't tell from someone's body whether that person is enlightened or not. And all the disciples of the Buddha who attained enlightenment while they were alive. But eventually, human bodies have to die. They decay, they get sick, and they die. The body of the Buddha was no exception, and that of any other enlightened being is not exception either. That is the nature of the body. So then, if you like, the second aspect of Nibbāna is found, which is Nibbāna without the five aggregates. Sometimes that is called Pari-Nibbāna, P-A-R-I, Pari-Nibbāna. And that was the state which the Buddha attained at the age of 80 when his body died. So then the question is, so where does he go? The Buddha's answer to this is to say, suppose there is a lamp and it is burning, oil lamp is burning, but eventually the flame goes out, either because the wick is exhausted, or the oil is exhausted, or they both are exhausted at the same time, or maybe a gust of wind comes along and blows the flame out. Can you now say where that flame has gone to? Has it gone to the north, or the south, or the east, or the west? No. All you can say is the conditions which had been in existence, which had maintained that flame, those conditions have now changed, but we can't say where the flame has gone to. So that's why we can't say where the Buddha goes to after death. There were 10 questions which the Buddha refused to answer. One day one of his monks, Malunkyaputta, came to see him and said, "Sir, I want an answer to these 10 questions, otherwise I'm not going to continue with the monastic life." He said, is the world eternal? Or is the world not eternal? Is the world finite? Is the world not finite? Are the spirit and the body the same? Or are the spirit and the body separate? That's 6. And the last 4 relate to, the term used there was Tathagata, which is the word that the Buddha used always to refer to himself. Does the Tathagata exist after death? That's question 7. Question 8. Does the Tathagata not exist after death? Does the Tathagata both exist and not exist after death? does the Tathagata both not exist after death and not exist after death? And the Buddha said, something like, you are a foolish man. You've never heard me answer these questions, and you never will hear me answering these questions because you don't need to know the answers. He gave a very famous analogy of the man shot in the arm by a poisoned arrow. Does anybody not know this little story? Okay. A man is shot in the arm by a poisoned arrow. His friends want to pull the arrow out. And the man says, no, wait. Hold, stop. First of all, I want to know who shot this arrow. What was his name? What was his family? What was his village? And who made the arrow? What was his name, his family, and his village? And the bow. Who made the bow? And what kind of wood was used for the bow? And what kind of stringing was used for the string of the bow? And he goes asking all these questions, and the blood, his poison enters the bloodstream, and he dies. The Buddha is making the point. We have an urgent problem. The urgent problem is we are mired in this existence of dukkha. Put all your energy, all your effort into getting out of this mess, getting out of dukkha, eradicating dukkha. Don't waste your time and energy on unnecessary investigations. So his teaching is a very focused teaching. He said, I teach just dukkha and the ending of dukkha. Or in another place he said, just as the mighty ocean has the taste of salt, meaning wherever you take water out of the ocean, it's got the same salty taste, so has this mighty Dhamma but one taste, the taste of deliverance. So the Buddha didn't want to get involved in a lot of what he thought were unnecessary, irrelevant questions. If your house is burning down, you don't need to know who designed it and who built it and all sorts of other things. That's unnecessary. Just get the fire brigade in, put the fire out. So his teaching is very much focused on dukkha and the ending of dukkha. It may well be that he knew a lot more than he taught us. One day he was walking through a forest with a party of his monks, and he picked up from the floor of the forest a handful of leaves. And he said, monks, which is greater, the quantity of leaves I have here in my hand, or the leaves on the trees above our heads? And they said, oh, sir, the number of leaves in your hand are very few. The number of leaves on the trees above our heads are very many. And the Buddha said, yes, just so. What I have taught you is like the leaves here in my hand. What I know is like the leaves on the trees above our heads. Meaning, he knew an awful lot more, but he didn't teach it. But what have I taught you? I've taught you. This is the noble truth of dukkha. This is the noble truth of the cause of dukkha. This is the noble truth of the cessation of dukkha, and this is the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. So, apart from that, he's not interested to explain to us all sorts of wonderful things about where the world came from and where the world is going to, and the origin of X, Y, and Z, and so on and so forth. Quite unimportant from Buddha's point of view. So he's focused very much on this dukkha and its eradication.